and their postdoc fellowship. It's specifically for doing work in Washington State and is really good for anyone who's interested in stuff like that. So like definitely should be on the radar of people who are looking for stuff like that. Okay, but yeah, so I'm excited to be here today to be talking about using imaging to study fine scale movement ecology of sockeye salmon in a social context. And hopefully maybe some of you have already heard about kind of bits and pieces of this project. Working with Andrew Birdall, we're using drones to film sockeye salmon and their kind of larger ecosystem up in Lake Iliamna area in Alaska. And there are really kind of two core pieces to this initially. One obviously is going and actually getting kind of the raw footage, but then also figuring out how do we actually get meaningful data from these relatively complex natural images and videos. And so what I want to talk about today, basically both aspects of that. So first, thinking about how it is that we can actually get meaningful data from these, and to talk a little bit about some of the models that I use. And I think what's interesting about them, especially for maybe this audience, is even though these machine learning models can produce pretty powerful outputs, at least the models I use are really built from pretty simple building blocks. And so it's kind of interesting, I think, to see how these kind of simple pieces that everyone's probably pretty familiar with, when you basically stack them on top of each other in different ways, can really open up some interesting possibilities. And then after that, I'll give everyone kind of an update on where we're at. And the short answer is we now have models that are doing a pretty good job of finding most of what we're interested in most cases. And so we're kind of now thinking about shifting from getting the data to then what we actually want to do with it. And so kind of the second half or third, basically I'll just show a bunch of videos and hopefully kind of give a sense of one that'll let you see kind of where we're at in terms of model performance, and also hopefully get everyone just kind of brainstorming in terms of like what are the cool next steps that we should think about. All right, but so yeah, kind of little background for me. My work is really based on this idea that computer vision is really changing how we can observe the natural world. And so I'm really interested in how can we take advantage of this, basically. And the reason this is happening is basically, two things. One, we have cameras that are deployed and can be deployed in many more contexts and with really high quality images. But of course, if you just have images and you're relying on humans to get data, then that's still a big bottleneck. And so it's really the combination of both having really good imaging hardware, but then also having ways to automate getting meaningful data from those. And so this combination really opens up the doors to lots of different things. And so for my own work, previously I've used this in a couple different contexts. So one here, this is basically monitoring a giant colony of fruit bats in Zambia, where we're really thinking about how many individuals from one day to the next. Or in this case, we're using imaging drones to follow individuals in groups in natural landscapes, so we can really both say where individuals located at kind of sub-meter latitude, longitude, but also just not where are they standing, but kind of what's the posture of individuals. So kind of how are they behaving, but then also what's the social context that's happening in, since we're recording all these individuals at the same time, and then also the physical landscape as well. So we're from the same observation that we're recording the animals, we can also build 3D maps of the landscape. So thinking about trees and bushes, and then also potentially pulling out kind of more abstract features like, say, animal trails. So from these single videos, using different processing techniques, being able to get pretty rich data sets. And so what I want to talk about now is my current work, which is basically thinking how can we use those similar kind of tools, but now, instead of say with zebra, up with sockeye salmon and this brown bear. And so one, this is just giving kind of a sense of where we're at in terms of the model, where certainly we're not getting everything, but more often than not, we can pretty clearly detect where the fish are, where this bear is. And that's exciting to see. And so across this sort of complex landscape of where obviously what's going on here is very different, both in terms of physically there's the bear hunting, but also in terms of the landscape. So there are kind of lots of overlapping data sets all built into this. Yeah.
The actual tracking of the dots is done all automatically. How does that?
Yeah, well, so I guess there's a distinction technically in terms of so right now what this is doing is just detection of, so on every frame it's trying to find all the salmon and all the bear. in this literal video, we're not through time connecting the dots, although that's something we can do. But yeah, this is basically every frame detecting all the individuals. And since we can do that well, then effectively you're getting trajectories.
And by the way, you can click on that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, awesome. Let's see. Okay, but as I was saying, kind of taking a step back, I think it's interesting to think about how can we actually do this basically? How can we take these images and get meaningful data from them? And something that's nice to highlight, I think, is that there are lots of different types of media that look very similar, but potentially can give us access to different sorts of information. So we're just looking at a video. In this case, now this is just a still frame taken from a higher altitude but higher resolution, and whereas in this case, potentially just being able to say how many individuals are actually in this big section of the pond, where are they located, and potentially maybe say how does that change over the course of the nesting season. Just that is something that's interesting to there's interesting data, and so being able to do that is a powerful first step. And so thinking about to start, we can just focus in on one crop just so we can kind of see the full resolution. And if we're thinking about how could we actually get data from this image, this honestly feels like you couldn't really ask for a better image to get an object from, in the sense of obviously, the water is nice and clear, you have bright red fish that are big. So yeah, if you couldn't really ask for a better situation. And so as a human, if you think about things just like color, size, shape, it wouldn't be that hard to figure out kind of the 4 sentences you'd have to tell someone to make them pretty consistently be able to point to all the fish that are here. But obviously in our case, we need to figure out how to actually tell the computer what we're interested in. And so taking a quick step back, just for anyone who hasn't thought about how an image actually exists within a computer. If anyone, I highly recommend taking a magnifying glass and looking at a screen. What you end up getting basically is this, just a grid of red, green, and blue dots. And in fact, any combination of red, green, and blue can produce a very wide range of colors. Basically, any color you've seen on a screen is just a combination of these red, green, and blue dots. And so what that means is, from the computer's point of view, we can store an image as just basically 3 height by width arrays that just record how much each red, green, and blue dot should be turned on. So one describing how much red should be on at every pixel, one how much blue, one how much green. And certainly this seems remarkable. I think even no matter what, it's kind of surprising that we can represent all these different colors as red, green, and blue. If you think about how the human eye works, and when you think about how we see colors through 3 different cones, it's still surprising, but maybe isn't as surprising that this could work. It's also worth highlighting, this is a reason why using screens for animals that see color in a different way is potentially creates all kinds of weird things you're not thinking about. But anyways, so yeah, if we have an image which is just some combination of red, green, and blue, then kind of thinking more concretely of what that actually means as just some examples. So on a screen, if you want white, then basically you're having all 3 turned on all the way. Black would be basically all turned off. Red would be the red subpixel turned on all the way, but the other 2 off. And yellow is some combination. So basically all red, a bunch of green, and just a little bit of blue. And it's cool. I mean, you can't quite see, but you can almost actually see if you come up to the screen that that's exactly what's happening. And okay, but so now going back to this actual image, so now we can actually think, we know kind of from a human how you describe it, but now thinking from the computer's point of view, where this is now just some height by width by 3 array of red, green, and blue information, how can we highlight and basically tell it these are the rules for finding the fish that we're interested in? And it certainly seems like basically just figuring out how to describe what a bright red blob is a solid way to go. What's interesting is if you start actually trying to do this, then it's not necessarily as obvious as you would think. So certainly as a first step, if you say, look for, we're looking for the bright red fish, so maybe just have a rule where you say any pixel that's turned on red more than 75%, then that's probably a fish. if you actually do that, then it's actually really bad. Which honestly, when I was doing this before, I was also caught off guard by this. But the reason why, when you think about it more, it makes sense from the point of view of, as I was saying, white is also red turned on all the way, plus blue, plus green. And so these bright white rocks, those are lit up well. When we actually look at the 3 different channels, you can see that, so certainly the fish have lots of red, but also there's just lots of red kind of in general. The channel, so there's the red channel, the green channel, the blue channel. So we basically split up the 3 parts. It's really the green channel actually where there's the most contrast between the fish and no fish, because again, what we see as red color is lots of red and also no green. And so when we're thinking about finding red blobs, then we actually have to do that now. So we have to think about, potentially say if you're more than 50% red and less than 50% green, then that starts to be more like a fish. And so that's certainly nice, but then you can see, there are still some pebbles and things like that. So certainly it's not perfect, but kind of continuing along, thinking about how can you just describe a red blob, then you could add another rule now. So now you're saying, it should be more red than not that much green. And then also, since we know roughly the size of a fish, then just think about any group of connected pixels that are highlighted. It should be a blob basically of at least 70 pixels. And kind of continuing, you can clean out a bunch of that stuff. But maybe as you can sort of see where this is going, we can keep getting better and better, but there are still things that just aren't as good as we would want. So for so we can still see there are 3 clearly non-fish that get highlighted. And this is where it becomes maybe more clear, or this is where we start to see how this kind of whole approach becomes a dead end relatively quickly, in the sense that, so now if we say, well, these clearly aren't as red as the fish are, so maybe we should just have a higher threshold of, it should be at least 55% red, which is great. We've just removed those false positives, but you can see simultaneously now there are actual fish that aren't detected. And so it's surprising to see that just that small change of 5% had a big effect. And also it just means that, is this better or worse than before? It's hard to say. It depends on what you're trying to do. And this is kind of highlighted most clearly once we go back to the original image. We were looking at kind of the cleanest part in the middle. But when you start actually looking at the whole image, we simultaneously have a lot of over detection happening on the shore. On the left side, where the watercolor kind of changes, then all those fish aren't being detected. And so the main thing that's clear is just that these rules that kind of feel like they should be pretty good for describing what these fish are, in fact, aren't actually very robust when you're in kind of a natural context where there's lots of variation in terms of watercolor and things like that. And we can try and do the same trick sort of have increase the red value that we need to clean up some of the edges, but then the undetected parts gets even worse. And this just continues if we now look, say, in a different context, where we're still using the more aggressive red, and yet now there's a whole bunch of grass that even with the more aggressive stuff is being detected. So basically it just means that you'd go insane trying to just figure out the perfect set of parameters that work in one image, and then you get to another image and you're stuck. And so, but luckily, if instead we switch to using deep learning sort of techniques, then if with a good trained model, then as you can see across basically the whole region from the kind of weird color on the left across, if you look closely, certainly they're missing some places. It's not perfect either, but you're in a much more much closer to what you want, and across different contexts as well. You can see there's issues as well. Also, for better or for worse, it's also detecting this dead sand in the forest.
Oh, that's really on dead sand.
Yeah, which again, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Unclear. But yeah, well, it's cool for that. If you're trying to figure out like where's the closest fish to the bear, then it's not good. But
this, I mean, when you mentioned this as being a huge issue, that we can't count how many salmon the bears kill. They'll kill a salmon, they'll drag it off into the bush.
Yeah.
You may never see it, so you don't know how many
there are. Yeah.
So like that's actually cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And apparently I don't know if it's 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but apparently there just were no trees up here. And that would have been, I mean, that would have been such a world. Here, I don't know if it's, you can tell, but all of these are pretty big trees. So unfortunately, so anyways, in the open part, that's definitely very cool. If it was 20 years ago, then it would just be like incredible. Okay, but so using these more complicated models let us basically get to the point that we want to be at. And so then so I think what's cool to see is that, as I was briefly saying, it's not too many complicated steps to basically get from this very sort of traditional thresholding type method that really wasn't working, to getting to kind of what's actually going on underneath the hood of the deep learning models that I'm talking about. So here, hopefully it's clear in the sense of what we're doing before. Basically is, for red, it's just a bunch of kind of up-down choices of if you have a certain amount of different parameters, then either you are a fish or not. That's not too dissimilar from thinking about something like logistic regression, where you can have, say, red value, green value, maybe size value, and then maybe you're fitting some basically linear type function to decide is that what you're looking for. And so if we think about a simple, I guess just quickly for the people in the room, how many people have kind of had a general sort of like, this is vaguely what a neural network is versus not? Oh, yeah, so just raise your hand if you have seen kind of. Okay, cool.
I still don't understand it, but
okay, yeah. we'll do another one. Okay, but yeah, so if we think about sort of the most classic traditional artificial neural network, then in a lot of ways, what it is just a whole bunch of sort of a stack of logistic style regressions. Specifically, if we have a bunch of input features where, say, it could be, how much red, how much green, maybe a size, then we're applying just some linear weight to each one of those. And then summing, it can literally be some kind of sigmoid type function or potentially just some kind of nonlinearity. But this is exactly equivalent to what we were just looking at. In this case, though, we can simultaneously, while doing, while finding weights for this particular function, we can also be finding lots of parallel weights for basically many functions in parallel. And then in addition to that, we can be taking the outputs from the previous models at the last layer and then using those, we're still just applying linear weights, summing, going through another nonlinearity. And we can basically just keep repeating this potentially many, many times. And so what that means is that we can now define kind of a much broader set of possible relationships between the input features and the output that we're interested in. And so especially if we have lots of training data, then it means that you can, within this big sort of function space, find one of many possible functions that does a good job finding the relationship between the input features and the output features. And so instead of having to have a very firm rule, like you need to be above some certain green value, then potentially you can have many more kind of specific relationships depending on what's going on with the other variables. Specifically, though, if we're thinking about, so that could be for a single pixel, maybe where you have, red, green, something like that. But if we're thinking about applying this across a whole image, then there are more complicated choices we have to make. Because, so either, again, it could just be for each pixel independently, we put each pixel kind of information through this model. But we know for an image, there's lots of spatial information that potentially provides useful context. If you have just one single lone red pixel, that's very different than in a, say, blob. And so we want to give the model access to some of the spatial information as well. If we were to just, in sort of a naive way, potentially take all the pixels in an image and feed that into one giant model, if you take a 4K image and the red, green, and blue channels for each one of those pixels, and that's 25 million input variables just for a single frame. So that, for lots of reasons, is not something that you want to do. And so in the end, how these models work So basically what we want is some balance basically between giving just information about a single pixel where there's no spatial information and giving all the information about the entire image, because then that's just way too much information. And so instead, we want kind of a compromise between that. And so how this works in practice is basically you're taking a local grid of information around each pixel of interest. And then you can think of this as just exactly what we were looking at before, but say instead of 3 values, in this case, it would be 27 values. But visually, we can see that actually there's kind of spatial information in this. And so, but big picture, it's the same idea. We have these input values. We're applying just some kind of linear filter, where so we're multiplying the filter values to the actual image values, summing those together, and then potentially after that summing, we could apply some sort of nonlinearity. And then we can now take that, so that gives us this descriptive number, say for a given pixel, and we can use that exact same filter now across an entire image. So we can basically, so we can look at the same relationship over the entire image. And you can think in the case, say, of the salmon that we're looking at, this is exactly what you want, meaning a salmon basically looks similar whether it's in the top of the frame or the bottom of the frame or the left side or the right side. And so the idea of if we can find a set of filters that basically look out for this is what a salmon should be, then the idea of kind of scanning that filter across the whole image is what we're looking to do. And in the same way that with sort of that we can stack all these on top of each other, in the imaging case, we can do that just as well. So if we have the input image, then we can be moving this filter over the input layer, which will then produce output values. Then over that array, we can have a different set of filters, and then just continuing on and on. Or potentially, again, at each layer, we can have multiple different filters that are pulling out different sorts of values. So potentially, even with the input image might start 3-dimensional in depth in terms of RGB, you might have, say, 128 dimensions on the next layer and more or less as you keep going. And so what it means is as you're applying these filters, then both you're getting more of the spatial information over time because the spatial information is kind of spreading out. And also as you're moving from 3 dimensions to higher dimensions, you can get a more sort of abstract representation of what's actually going on in these images. And then at the output, we can do something that's actually very similar to what we started doing but now instead of just having some kind of up-down rule in terms of you need to have a certain amount of green at the beginning. Instead, now we can look at these last layers where, again, we have many more dimensions that are representing sort of more abstract information about what's going on across more of the image. And then say, well, if at these later dimensions, if you have some amount of basically activation, sort of similar to thinking if you have some amount of green, but now instead of it being green, it's some sort of more abstract feature, then you can say that's actually the objects of interest or not. And then I guess the last piece is, as we're training these models, each image is paired with annotations. And so then the job of the model is to basically find a set of weights that highlight the object that we've actually annotated. And so then in the case of the salmon and bear, we're basically doing exactly that. So in our particular case, annotated image by hand looks something like this. So we have boxes around each fish. It's a little hard to see, but there are blue boxes around the 2 cubs and the adult bear. And so we have 143 of these 124 square pixel crops in the training set, where each one of those has from a couple individuals up to about 300 salmon. And then in the validation set to see basically if the performance is doing well on images that it's never seen before, we have 36 similar examples, but again, where it's examples that the computer has never seen in the training process.
Where's the bear? Where's the bear?
Oh. Yeah, so it's an adult bear there kind of walking off the screen, and then two dark cubs.
Sounded much easier.
Yeah. And so if we take those annotations I was just talking about, train these models, then we can get what starts to be, I think, pretty meaningful results in terms of, so for the case of the salmon, across all of those validation images, we correctly detect about 95% of the individuals that are actually there, and of any one that anytime we say there's a salmon there, there's about 90% chance that it actually is a salmon. And then for the bear, it's we're not as good at detecting all the bears that actually are there. We're at 84% roughly, but we're pretty precise when we say that there's a bear there. Then it more often, or 95% of the time, is a real bear. Something that's worth highlighting, and as a challenge, I guess just in general, but particularly in this case, is that these results aren't going to be exactly equivalent for every image you look at or something. There are potentially some images where the water is really murky and something weird is happening, and across that image we're detecting many fewer individuals, and potentially a case like this where maybe it's very clear and we're detecting even more than 95%. So in terms of thinking about monitoring and population counts and stuff like that, it's always important to be thinking about how these sort of average scores actually relate to what you're doing. Okay, so that again, that was sort of in the context of just trying to think about how we can actually get data. What I want to do now is just kind of show some more examples, particularly in the context of the relationship between the hunting bears and the salmon, about kind of what I'm starting to look at, what to me seems interesting, and then also these are all ones that have been run through the model, and so hopefully gives a sense of kind of where the data is at, and also sort of what the raw data looks like. Yeah, so that's what I'm about to start doing. I guess if anyone has any pressing questions about what I was talking about before, yeah.
I'm just curious about if there's another, is that salmon identification rate, does that assume that every fish it identifies of that size is a salmon of this species, or will that model reject, say, like a big trout that's roughly the same size?
Yeah, so how these models work is it's very much about the model is trying to learn the patterns that are in the annotations. And so in our case, we're only annotating, we basically have a salmon class and we have a bear class. And the short answer, or the important answer, I guess, here is that basically it's all sockeye salmon here. That there are a couple of other things that are here, but it's not like 50% another species or something. So yeah, in our case, and the ones that are there that are different are much smaller and not bright red, but so if you had a situation where there were relatively easy to see multiple species, then if you annotated the different species, then yeah, you could train that. But it's not going to come out for free, I guess. Yeah.
Been able to compare the estimates of abundance to like the surveys that the salmon program does?
No, there are what I'm showing here is pretty recent in the sense of just, I don't know, like a week and a half ago or something. So I haven't formally gone through and like, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of actually saying exactly like, I'm trying to see. I don't know. It definitely doesn't get all of them.
Yeah.
And so certainly there's interesting stuff to do here in terms of actually trying to quantify how good do we do. And then it'd be interesting to think about how that relates to other numbers. I think, yeah, I mean, obviously there are obvious pros and cons with both methods. And so then just thinking, like, I think it's exciting to think about how this fits into
Yeah.
to other stuff.
The way that having been someone who's surveyed ponds like that, where you're like 170.
Yeah.
Like, we're trained, but.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, no,
It's probably a little bit off, so.
yeah, no, I think it's interesting to think about the two, what we're not doing right now is distinguishing sex. I think for some of the pictures, we definitely can. There's certainly a limit where at some point, if you're flying too high, you can't. I think that should be pretty feasible for us going forward. The main other big caveat, which isn't a huge thing, but is important to remember, I guess, is when the fish are relatively spread out, we're pretty good at detecting them, as I guess you'll see in a couple examples. When they get really, really dense into like a ball, then one of our big challenges, honestly, just as a human, we can't annotate it well, even because just it's hard for us to see. And so then, but anyways, it definitely will be interesting to start looking into that.
Yeah.
When the real place can just get the count but then think about how many sound like in that the legs.
Yeah.
There's someone virtually sitting in the
Yeah.
You could, and they're only doing it 10 minutes an hour.
Yeah.
You have a video
Yeah. I know there have definitely been conversations with various people thinking about things like that. I don't know. I don't know enough about the, like, obviously for all these things, there's always complications when you start doing it. I think it seems possible, big picture. Okay, so let's start looking at some things. So basically, to give a sense of what the data set looks like right now, we have basically 36 successful bear hunts just from last summer, which is nice. There are lots of caveats within that in terms of potentially that can be, multiple successful hunts of one individual, in a 5-minute span or something. We don't obviously, we potentially in some instances we might be able to say like, oh, this is the same individual from a couple of days ago, but we don't, I guess we certainly can't assume that we know these are the same or different individuals. And how we get these is basically sometimes we'll literally do a kind of survey around trying to look for bears. Sometimes we'll just be filming other things. And whenever we see a bear, we're like, oh, we should follow the bear. What that means is that it's definitely not some like perfect random sampling of the bears that are there. And there's also, I guess, a big distinction between, so apparently the like big serious bears are hunting at night. The bears that we're filming during the day are the bears that can't safely be there when the big bears are seriously hunting at night. And so we potentially seem to get a lot more, say, mothers with cubs, or potentially maybe like juvenile-ish bears. So again, if you're thinking, there's a question of what it even means to say what the best hunter is, but if you're thinking through the classical, huge, big hunter, we're not necessarily looking at those either. But within the ones that we do have, in sort of an informal way, it seems like there's sort of 3 common patterns we see in terms of the hunt. What I've been calling, there's sort of a grab where the bear is more or less just standing there and kind of with some energy, but reaches down and grabs the fish. There's more of a pounce where it's kind of a full body lunge, but from static to going. And then what I'm calling a charge, which is where it's like multiple kind of bounds and then grabbing a fish, which we'll look at some examples of that. And then also over these observations, some of these are happening in a big pond, some are happening on a stream, and some basically the bear starting from the land and then jumping in. And then also there's definitely a variation in terms of quality, in terms of the big things that I've been looking at so far. One is how clearly can you see the actual fish that ends up getting targeted? Like, can we clearly say this is the fish the bear ends up attacking? How clearly can we actually see the whole sort of environment of what's happening? Potentially, you'll see one clear example where you can actually see the fish that gets attacked pretty clearly, but it's pretty hard to say, are there other fish around? Like, we're trying to kind of ask what's the kind of social context. That can be easier or harder in some contexts. I guess, yeah, so those are sort of the main things. And so, And so thinking about that initially, there are sort of two, I mean, what I think is interesting about these videos is that you can kind of think of there as being almost multiple data sets, or at least certainly multiple questions within the same thing. So obviously we can think about this from the bear's point of view of, you know, what does it seem like the bear is actually targeting? What I'll show in a second is kind of the next step is to get key point tracking on the bear. And so I'll show that in a second. Basically, we should be able to get where it's looking, more or less. So being able to ask both before it's actually targeting an individual, are there kind of certain things that the bear seems to lock on? You know, potentially is that in high density areas, low density areas, and then similarly in terms of what the bear actually attacks. Again, there's different kind of theory thinking about predators of, you know, again, should they be kind of like going into the middle of the group or an isolated individual, but being able to actually ask, at least for this subset of bears, do there seem to be patterns in terms of what individuals they're targeting? I think that's something that's interesting. But of course, we can also be thinking of this basically from the fish's point of view. Something that hopefully you'll see over these videos that I think is maybe surprising or maybe not, is that even when a bear is clearly in the water trying to eat fish, a lot of the fish are pretty calm and don't seem to really care. And so it's interesting, I think, to think about, can we see maybe what's driving what the difference is between a fish that's actually responding or not, in terms of, is it, you know, both in terms of maybe proximity directly to the bear, but also thinking about maybe social information as well of, you know, you can be responding to the bear itself, or you can be responding to individuals around you that are responding to the bear. And so thinking about, yeah, what seems to be kind of driving those results. And so again, just kind of giving a sense of, so this is showing, I was hoping to get it set in time, but I couldn't. So this is actually the annotations. This isn't coming out from the model, but I've done similar things to this before. So it should be possible where we can basically say, you know, for each individual, this is where the nose is, where the ears are, kind of shoulders. So for an individual like this, we're not just saying that there's a bear there, but we're actually saying the bear is there and it's kind of looking at this location. And then, yeah, also kind of embedded in this where we can have the locations of the individuals, and then also, you know, kind of position velocity for each of those individuals. And so yeah, so we can start just kind of looking at some things. So this is an example of what I would call, what I've been calling a grab. And to me, this is one of the sort of most low-key catches that I've seen of where, so I think that's a mother bear who just walks in. You can see the fish isn't responding at all. The bear gets really close and just grabs it. And so I think that's one of the things that has been interesting to me watching these, is the amount of seeming effort on the bear's part is very variable. But yeah, so in that case, it seemed like that was just no issue. There's some other stuff going on as well. All right, and so now this is another one that I'm calling a grab. This is the example I was talking about of where, so obviously it's super muddy. It seems absolutely hopeless for a bear to catch a fish. The fish would have to really go out of its way to get caught. And there it goes. And then the bear gets it. So this is one where you can actually see the fish who got caught well, and you could see that it got tracked well in the model. It would be impossible to say what else is going on in there. It's interesting to think how much that, I mean, potentially also the fish can't see each other if it's super muddy.
Also, you have to be careful, like glare.
Yeah, so glare can be an issue, and definitely sometimes is an issue. In this case, it is mud. If you look closely, you can see the clouds of mud.
The last bit, the sun's coming from like far south.
So now this is shifting to what I've been calling the pounce, which is so kind of more of a full body situation. That's not getting it, and then it'll get one in a second. All right, so there it gets it. And so again, I think it's interesting where you can kind of see this gradient of where these fish, at least before, were certainly very affected by what's going on. it feels like pretty quickly the fish don't seem to be bothered really. And so that's something that I think would be interesting. And I think just by basically looking at sort of normal sort of velocity distributions, it'd be interesting if we can basically pull out and quantify these are fish that are basically in their sort of normal state versus responding, and think about what seems to drive whether the fish actually respond or not. These to me are the most exciting ones. So yeah, these are what I've been calling the charges. Where yeah, so you can see the bear is coming up down the stream and just goes for it. But again, so these are all fish that were just nearly eaten by a bear. Some of them seem to maybe care. A lot of them. And then yet, so these ones already seem to be swimming actively back towards the bear. Those aren't, I don't think, the same individuals. But again, it's certainly, I guess, yeah, just interesting to think about why or why not some of these fish seem to care or not. Something just separately to note, which is, this is one of the nesting ponds, and so you can see all these circles are active nests. So certainly one big possible explanation of why a fish really doesn't want to move is because if you're on your nest, then that really obviously matters. So there is a lot that's going on here. We're coming towards the end. This is a in-water charge. This is an example of where it's starting to get quite dense, and so the detections certainly are having some issues. That's one. So that got the fish. I don't know if people saw, but the ball sort of had its own response. And so certainly we know in some systems, the density of individuals has a big effect in terms of kind of how information flows through from one individual to the next. Yeah. There certainly, I think, potentially are some interesting trade-offs of, are you potentially you want to, well, yeah, potentially in some systems, if you have high density, then information can flow well through it, potentially tells you about something like a bear. At the same time, if you're trying to kind of maintain your nest and have your area, then there are definitely potentially some trade-offs that would be interesting to look at. And so kind of related to that, the last thing that I want to show is, so there are all these examples of where we can think about, fish clearly in at least proximity to a bear, and thinking about, how does the bear itself potentially change behavior? How does the behavior of conspecifics around you affect your behavior, sort of, and kind of how that flows out. But I think there's something also really interesting to think about, of just in general thinking about, it's been interesting reading papers in terms of this sort of tension between, it feels like, people obviously know that these individuals spend lots of time together, potentially even in what you could call, say, at least social contexts, or maybe even social groups. We certainly don't necessarily think of these animals as like poster children for like super social animals or something. And yet even certainly in the examples we're just seeing, individuals are responding to each other. But also in sort of a more general way. So here, if we're looking, this is now kind of final stages of the migration, where we can watch fish swim through here, and basically have two Y mazes. This is going up to one nesting pond, that's going up to another nesting pond. The third choice is going to a basically forest spring. And so if we start watching fish move through this, here too, clearly individuals are responding to each other in kind of in a social way. And so thinking about what that means, both in terms of, say, not being predated upon, we have lots of examples of bear actually catching fish here, but also in terms of kind of navigating to where you want to go. I think that's interesting to think about. What's also interesting, I think, though, is, so if we watch these fish here, it's interesting how much, I guess, what they're trying to do. I mean, so they're swimming back. It just slowed down, so you can see this easier. One fish turns around, the others don't seem to really care. They're also going that way. Now a seagull comes and scares them, and now they're back heading in the direction they just came from. And what you'll see is the fish are going to go right back to the area that they just were basically 2 minutes ago, where they decided to turn around and then come back. Once they get up there, they're going to turn around again. Kind of the group will split up a little bit. Some individual will come all the way back down here and turn around again. This is just all to say that they're doing some non-obvious things, I guess, in terms of either they're very confused, or they're not very confused, and then they're trying to do something that, at least to me, again, isn't obvious. Certainly, to me, in a naive way, I would have thought if we have these two kind of clear decision points, which are maybe hard to distinguish, there would be a lot of theory to say you kind of swim up to one of the decision points, maybe go back and forth in the arms a little bit, maybe come back, check this side or something. The idea of just being in one of the arms, effectively swimming back and forth, it seems like that's similar water the whole way. And so kind of like, what's the new thing that's entering your brain that's making you decide now's the time to turn around? Additionally, this is at the end of the season, or back half of the season. So each one of these ponds is completely full of fish. Huge amounts of sediment is presumably being dug out. Huge amounts of pheromones and things are coming down, particularly at that branch where it's a decision between more or less kind of like pure spring water and all of that other water coming through. You would think if it's an individual that's just trying to smell kind of back to the pond, if it's made it this far, you would think those are pretty distinguishable arms. And so the fact that they're not just swimming up and choosing where to go, again, potentially to me makes it feel like maybe there's just some other things on their mind. And so it's interesting that's something that I'd like to really start digging into. All right, so that was all pretty loose, but hopefully interesting, just to get a sense of kind of where this is going. Again, this is with, so working with Andrew, of course, and then Albert is another collaborator at UMass Boston that Andrew's been working with for a while. And with that, I would be very excited to just hear any thoughts or questions that anyone has. And I guess I'll say that so the plan is this August to go up again, basically, and try and be collecting even more footage, and potentially in an even more sort of directed way, really think about, this is the exact sort of footage that we'd like to be collecting. And so we're very much at the stage right now where it's trying to figure out how to kind of, what the best things to focus on are. So thank you. Yeah, so we definitely aren't keeping track of individuals from one observation to the next. Even within an observation, certainly for a bear, it'd be easy enough because there's only one or two bears. For the actual fish, the goal is going to be to track them beyond just a single frame. I mean, basically have lots of track segments, where so hopefully kind of for any given moment, we kind of have like velocity fields, I guess, of what individuals are doing. But I think we're not going to be concerned if saying from the beginning of the observation to the end, is this actually the same individual? Just because that gets a lot more complicated, because just if fish are passing and they disappear and all kinds of things. And I think there are enough questions that we don't need that we'll just start there. So I honestly, the next step basically is going from the detections to tracks. And so that's where for the previous projects I showed, I used pretty just sort of like straightforward kind of like distance-based metrics for tracking, which worked well enough. And certainly in this context, in most cases would work fine also, again, for getting kind of like multi-second extended tracks. I'm working on something now, which is basically incorporating tracking into the actual detection part, which should make it even better. But I haven't done that yet. But anyways, this based on previous projects, I think we should be pretty, in a pretty good way able to, again, at least say in the moment, this is where the individuals are and this is how they're moving.
Yeah, thanks. This is super cool. I was kind of curious as to how portable these models are. So say if you wanted to apply your detection model to a different bay someplace else, or even like the same place, but slightly different conditions, like, you know, different color of the substrate or any of that stuff. Like, do you have to retrain the model every time, or is there flexibility as to how it can pick up the fish or something?
Yeah, so the short answer, I guess, is it depends. I mean, certainly generally, if you're moving into a different landscape, then certainly the assumption, I think, would be not that you're starting from scratch, but that you would want to take a couple examples at least from the new environment, annotate those, and then you can I guess basically what's happening here with these models is since they have kind of so many parameters, they kind of can describe such a kind of wide range of situations. Generally, it means that for the examples that they've been shown in the annotations, then they can be good at distinguishing that and to kind of like finding the boundary between, say, the background examples that they've seen and the foreground examples that they've seen. But potentially there's all kinds of other things that they just haven't been forced to kind of deal with. And so if you have a completely different environment, then it's still going to output numbers for those. It's just not going to have been sort of pushed in any useful direction. So that's where actually, I don't know if you saw, but in some of these examples, you will see like a big rock or something that's labeled as a bear. And that's one, I think, where it's not that surprising that if in the training examples, there wasn't a particularly big rock, then it's not really in the model's interest to try and deal with that. I mean, because it's just like generally, if the rule is big brown things, and that's good enough for the training examples, then that's where the model will stay. But it only takes a couple examples where you suddenly do have a bunch of rocks where you're clearly showing the model, this shouldn't be a bear anymore. This should be a rock that can learn pretty quickly. So, so I guess that's just to say, they're definitely not fully portable in the sense of like, now we have a salmon model and we can just use it on all salmon, but they are, they can, I guess, learn quickly from not too many new examples, such that if you already have a model that's pretty good for this, for images that look more or less like this, but you just need to have a different background, then it doesn't take too much training to incorporate that in.
I'm kind of trying to get a sense of how easy it is for somebody to pick this up and learn it. Like obviously you need some images, you have to manually annotate the images.
Yeah.
There's training data. But from that step, is it a case of you really need to have a lot of knowledge about deep learning to figure out what the best models are, the best choices, or is it just like put it into a package and the package spends 10,000 computer years and spits out a model and it works? What's the...
Yeah, I think it really depends on the use case. So what I've found is that if you're trying to process images where there aren't too many objects that you care about in each one, and they're pretty easy for you as a human to see. Like, so basically say if you had someone like standing behind your shoulder and you could just like describe to them, these are the things that I'm interested in, then there are lots of models today that with basically pretty standard configurations will work quite well. So yeah, so if you were imagining like
more like for this use case.
Yeah. So this is borderline, I guess, in the sense that, so say if you were just interested in the bears, then that would be a case where that would be like very clean. Where there aren't that many of them, they're pretty easy to see. You could annotate a bunch and then you'd be good to go. Even for the salmon, it's like close to being able to do that. And for the clearest images, it would also be very much in that case. Something that actually ended up being a little bit weird, that I wasn't necessarily expecting, was that in fact many of these images have enough salmon that they push you beyond the number of objects basically that people are expecting there to be in kind of the standard models. And so that's where it's one of these things where it's like, once you know it's an issue, and you know it's like, oh, now you have to just change this parameter, then it's not like a massive engineering challenge or something. But in terms of being able to say, if you don't know that that parameter is there to like turn, then, you know, then for a while you're like, well, why is this not happening? So I guess I'm hesitant. I don't want to be like, oh, like anyone can, like, you know, it's just like easy, like, but yeah, certainly if you have a case where it's like, oh, I have just like a video filming either like a tank of a bunch of animals running around, or it's like an overpass and I just want to like count the elk as they go underneath or something, then it is pretty robust.
How much human effort, I guess, is required to get, you know, those estimates of like how many salmon there are out there? You know, so there's the training, like creating the training data set, there's going out to actually film those things. Like would it be feasible to replace like the survey that's being done? Is that, you know, something that you considered?
The challenge always when you start, I mean, so with this, I guess like with all methods, there are some things that it's really good at and some things that it's not good at. And often I think the challenge is when you're trying to think about, say, taking something that humans were doing and then doing something else, it's not going to be like these aren't going to be just like linearly like 20% better than a human in all ways. So this, when you can see, like, so for counting fish, I think this is really, really good. For the actual human task right now, it's like a two-step thing. One is going out and counting the fish, which I think there's probably reason to think that this could be better than that. The next step is everyone going around the shore and like looking in all these like crevices and stuff and pulling out dead fish and actually labeling like what part did the bear eat and measuring them and like pulling out ear bones and things like that potentially are like a very major part of that data set. And this definitely can't do that. But I mean, so you can think of different parts. So again, like you can see some dead fish here. I think the model could do that. Okay. But those would be only the ones that are visible. You wouldn't be able to get, you could estimate roughly, is it like a very big fish or a very small fish from here? You wouldn't be able to say at centimeter level, how big is the fish? And then certainly, yeah, we're not going to pull out the ear bones. So I think it really depends. It would just be a different data set. And so then there are different questions that it would be better at, and then other ones that it wouldn't even be able to answer. So it's interesting to think about. Well, that's perfect. We'll leave the fun part for you, and then. There have been people though who've used similar models to actually count the rings on the ear bones though.
Oh, yeah.
So that is a place that could be cool.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
We should use it.
Okay. Very well. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really cool.
Yeah, I was pushing to get the key points on. Like that, those will be the cool videos, but I didn't.
The last one where the bear was charging and then the salmon were reacting, and the distance between the salmon.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting to track like what signal was being sent
Yeah.
through the salmon in the
Yeah.
before it hit that other salmon, then
Yeah.
split apart.
Well, and also in that one, it looked like, so I've noticed a bunch of times, it feels like the seagulls are spooking the big ball. And I think in that one, it's hard to tell exactly what drives what, but there's definitely some seagull action, there's bear action, and there's also salmon responding to each other. And so yeah, looking at all of that, I think is interesting. I mean, I certainly have this like, you know, there's certainly some chance. Well, the seagulls definitely do seem to be affecting the balls of fish. If it actually were the case that the bears are like much better hunting when one of those balls is broken up, you could imagine some crazy thing where it's like the seagulls like pseudo hunting with the bears. But that's certainly many videos away from quantifying that.
Have you noticed any response at all to the drone? Like if you move the drone around, does the fish? notice that?
The fish don't seem to care. If you, you definitely have to fly in a careful way with the bears. Because they, certainly if you fly super low or something, they care. 80-ish meters, I mean, so pretty high. Meters. Sometimes we go lower, but it's certainly not like right on top of them,
Yeah.
but you can hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
you.
By the way, there's still cookies at the back here from.
Oh.
That was amazing.